let's start with some basics, because I like to do this in panels just to sort of create a foundation. We sort of all get on, at least start on the same page, and then we sort of go wherever we might go. And I'm going to direct this to Chris, or actually, no, I think all three will have something that's. One of the things that I struggled with when I first started getting into this, and even though as a professional working with men and women in very diverse workforces that in many ways were consciously created by me because I enjoy that diverse workforce, when I started trying to sort through what the difference between sexual harassment, sexual assault, and rape was, it was really kind of confusing. So I think it might be helpful. What is the definition of, what are those terms? What do they mean? Sexual battery, sexual assault, how does that differ from rape? And are they meaningful? And also, I think, to what extent that will affect the kinds of data we talk about and information. So I'm going to start with Jennifer on this one, because this is really this is crucial, and then we'll just go from there.
So I'm going to start with the law school answer. It depends in terms of the definitions as to whether you're talking about a legal definition or a sociological definition or a clinical definition from psychology or social work. But basically, when we're talking about sexual harassment, we're talking about words or deeds or posters or postings that are degrading or intimidating or harassing and have sexual content, right? Because sexual harassment has to have sexual content. When we're talking about sexual assault or sexual battery or rape, we're talking about unwanted, non-consensual sexual touch, rape, penetration, but it's going to vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction as to what exactly sexual assault is versus sexual battery versus rape. But the thing to keep in mind is that it is unwanted, non-consensual sexual activity.
And it involves a physical
Yes.
connection, right? As opposed to harassment, which would be verbal.
Right.
So I'll speak from, got aggressive with the mic there. I'll speak from the student perspective. So when we talk to students, we usually very briefly touch on definitions. A lot of times students and other people will use them for mean making. So they'll use them to define what happened. But a lot of times people will find that those definitions don't fit their experiences or something that they don't want to use to identify their experience. So oftentimes when we talk to students, we acknowledge the fact that we use the term power-based personal violence, which covers relationship violence, stalking, and sexual violence. Happens before people come to university, while they're at university, and after they leave, because we think it's very important to acknowledge this isn't siloed to just universities and campuses. So we'll cover definitions, but it's really more of a conversation around boundaries and consent. When we are working with students, we use an active definition for consent, which is we define consent as asking the question of a capable person with adequate disclosure and without coercion. And there's a really fun way we can break that down, and students love it because they engage and they actually realize what active consent looks like. So that's a really big, important part of the conversation for us beyond just the legal definitions, because again, a lot of people find those don't fit their experiences and they want to define it for themselves.
Well, and I think I can just add sort of a research perspective. When we go about designing a survey instrument that's designed to collect data on people's experiences with sexual assault or rape or sexual battery, we don't use those terms for those very same reasons. Those are legal terms, and we know from talking to survivors that their conception of what a rape is or what a sexual assault is or what a sexual battery is doesn't necessarily map onto what the legal definitions for those things are. Very often they conceptualize a rape as something that's done to them by a stranger. Sometimes it's violent. They've tried to fight them off. They couldn't. It was in a dark alley, whatever their concept of what a rape is. And they may experience what is absolutely a rape by almost anyone else's definition, and certainly under legal terms. But if you ask them if they were raped, they would say, well, no, I wasn't raped. So when we design a survey instrument, we try to be very explicit with our language in terms of defining what sexual contact is and the types of sexual contact. And then we use those exact same terms that Jennifer spoke of, sexual contact, once they understand what it is in our terms, that you did not consent to and that you did not want to happen. And that was what we use to define sexual assault, which is sort of an umbrella term for us. And then in follow-up questions, we find out whether penetration occurred during the incident, and if it did, we consider that incident rape. If penetration did not occur and instead it was, say, forced touching of sexual body parts, then we define it as sexual battery in our survey.
One of the things I'm thinking as I'm listening to them, in part, one of the beauties of this, for me coming into this, is that I had to learn a whole new set of language, a whole new set of terms. If some of these definitions or they're using terms that you don't understand, just write them down and we'll ask questions. I mean, because I think it's important to understand what they mean. So much of what I've seen in this space has been really people that are interested in doing or achieving the same goals, but they're talking past each other because they don't have the right language. And they have different conceptions. I've run into that a number of times with my blogging on this issue in particular.